My name is Claire. At 29, I'm a chef at one of the city's most upscale restaurants. Cooking is my passion, my art. But let me tell you, my life isn't just about perfecting recipes. It's also about dealing with a recipe for disaster, namely, my mother-in-law, Margaret. I met Alex, my husband, in a way most people do these days, online. We clicked instantly. He was charming, with a smile that could light up the darkest room. We married within a year, a small ceremony but filled with love. That's when Margaret entered the picture, and let's just say, she wasn't the typical doting mom. It was a crisp autumn evening when I first met her. Alex had arranged a dinner at our place. I remember being nervous, wanting to impress her. "Mom, this is Claire. She's an amazing chef," Alex had introduced me with pride in his voice. Margaret, a tall woman with sharp features, had looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my apron like it was a piece of alien clothing. "A chef, huh? I hope you can cook something more refined than diner food." I had chuckled, nervously. "I'll do my best to impress you." Dinner was my arena, and I had put my heart into it. The table was set with my best dishes, herb-crusted lamb, a delicate risotto, and a chocolate mousse to die for. Margaret had poked at her food, a frown forming as she tasted each dish. "Well, it's edible, I suppose. Not what we're used to, but it'll do." Alex had shot me an apologetic look, but said nothing. That was Alex, always avoiding confrontation, especially with his mother. After dinner, as I was clearing the table, Margaret cornered me in the kitchen. "Claire, dear, I hope you understand that Alex comes from a refined family. We have certain standards." I had nodded, trying to keep my cool. "I understand, Mrs. Thompson. I'll keep that in mind." She had sniffed, her gaze cold and calculating. "See that you do. My son deserves the best." That night, as Alex and I lay in bed, I turned to him. "Your mother is quite something." He had sighed, pulling me close. "She's always been like that. But don't worry, we'll manage." Manage, I thought. If only I had known then how much of an understatement that would be. It was a busy Friday night at the restaurant. The kind of night where the kitchen is a whirlwind of activity, and I'm in my element, orchestrating the chaos. That's when Margaret decided to grace us with her presence, unannounced. I was plating a delicate salmon dish when I saw her sweeping through the dining area, like she owned the place. She had that look on her face, the kind that spelled trouble. My heart sank. I watched from the kitchen as she settled at a prime table, snapping her fingers for service. I wiped my hands on my apron, bracing myself for the inevitable. Emerging from the kitchen, I approached her table with a cautious smile. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson." "What a surprise! What can I get for you tonight?" She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "Oh, Claire, darling. I thought I'd try your little restaurant. Bring me your best dishes. Spare no expense." I nodded, my mind racing. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson." The orders were extravagant: caviar, truffle pasta, the most expensive wine. As I prepared her dishes, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. When the bill arrived at her table, Margaret glanced at it, then waved it away. "Oh, I won't be needing this. Put it on Claire's tab. She's family, after all." My head chef, who had delivered the bill, came back to me with a puzzled look. "Claire, she says you're covering her bill." I felt a knot in my stomach. "Did she now?" I muttered, clenching my fists. I walked back to her table, the bill in hand. "Mrs. Thompson, there seems to be a misunderstanding. This is a business, and..." Margaret cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Nonsense, Claire. You can afford a little generosity for your family. It's the least you can do." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mrs. Thompson, this is highly irregular. But she was already standing, her coat draped over her arm. Don't make a scene, dear. It's unbecoming. Just take care of it. And with that, she left, leaving me with a bill that could pay my rent twice over. How could she? How could she just walk in and expect me to foot the bill for her extravagance? I felt used, cornered. And worst of all, I felt alone in this. Alex would just tell me to let it go, to keep the peace. But peace, I realized, came at a price. A price I was no longer sure I was willing to pay. Holidays. A time for family, laughter, and good food. Well, in my world, it meant one thing, cooking up a storm for Margaret's never-ending guest list and dealing with her endless demands. It was Thanksgiving, and as usual, Margaret had decided to host it at our place. After all, Claire, you have the space, and you're such a good cook, she had said on the phone, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. The day before Thanksgiving, I was in the kitchen, buried under a mountain of groceries that I had paid for, of course. The menu was a laundry list of Margaret's favorites, no regard for what I or anyone else liked. As I was peeling potatoes, Alex walked in, looking sheepish. "Babe," Mom called. "She wants to add a few more dishes. Some relatives just RSVP'd." I looked at him, my hands covered in potato skins. "More dishes? Alex, I'm already swamped here." He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I know, but you know how she is. It's just a few more people." "Just a few more people," I muttered. It was always just a few more people. The day of Thanksgiving was a blur. I cooked and cooked, the kitchen a battleground. When the guests started arriving, I was still in my apron, a whirlwind of pots and pans. Margaret swept into the kitchen, her nose in the air. "Claire, dear, do make sure everything is perfect. We have some very important guests." I forced a smile. "Everything's under control, Mrs. Thompson." The dinner was a hit, or so it seemed. I barely had time to sit down, let alone eat. Margaret played the gracious host, basking in the compliments, as if she had slaved over the stove all day. After the guests had left, I was clearing up, my back aching, my feet sore. That's when Margaret decided to give her feedback. "Claire, the turkey was a tad dry, and the cranberry sauce too tart. And really, dear, you could have dressed up a bit. You looked like a maid amongst the guests." I clenched my jaw, holding back the retort that was on the tip of my tongue. "I'll keep that in mind for next time, Mrs. Thompson." Alex, who had been silent all evening, finally spoke up. "Mom, Claire worked hard. It was a great dinner." Margaret sniffed. "Hard work is expected, Alexander. No need for praise. Good night." As I watched her leave, I wondered why I was putting up with this. Why I was allowing myself to be treated like a doormat, my efforts dismissed, my feelings ignored. Alex put an arm around me. "Don't take it to heart, babe. Let's just go to bed." I nodded, too tired to argue. But inside, a storm was brewing. Something had to change, and soon. I never thought I'd be grateful for getting sick, but when I caught the flu right before Christmas, it felt like a twisted sort of blessing. Maybe now I'd get a break from Margaret's demands. Or so I thought. I was curled up on the couch, buried under blankets, a mountain of used tissues beside me. That's when my phone rang. It was Margaret, of course. "Claire, dear, you do remember Christmas is at our place this year. You'll be cooking, won't you?" Her voice was as cold as the winter outside. I croaked into the phone, "Margaret, I'm really sick. I don't think I can." She cut me off, her tone icy. "Sick? Convenient timing, I must say. We're counting on you, Claire. Don't be selfish." Selfish? I couldn't believe my ears. "Margaret, I can barely stand up. I'm contagious." There was a pause, then a huff. "Fine. We'll manage somehow. Don't expect us to be sympathetic." The call ended, and I was left staring at the phone, a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. Later that day, Alex came home, his face tense. Mom called me. She's really upset, Claire. She thinks you're faking it. Faking it? I sat up, the room spinning a bit. Alex, look at me. Do I look like I'm faking? He sat beside me, his expression softening. No, you look terrible. But you know how Mom is. She's stressed about Christmas. Stressed? What about me? Sick, exhausted, and now accused of lying. Alex, I need you to understand. I'm really sick. I can't cook for Christmas. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. I'll talk to her. Just rest, okay? Rest. Right. As if I could rest with Margaret's words echoing in my head. The next few days were a blur of fever, chills, and restless sleep. Miraculously, I started feeling a bit better just before Christmas. Not great, but no longer on death's door. I told Alex, hoping for some understanding. Instead, he said, "That's great, babe. So you can make it to Mom's for Christmas, right?" I stared at him, my heart sinking. Alex, I'm still weak. I can't cook for everyone. He looked disappointed, almost hurt. But it's Christmas, Claire. Mom's expecting us. Can't you just make a small effort? Small effort? I was fighting to get out of bed, and he wanted a Christmas feast. No, Alex. I can't. And I won't. My voice was firm, a hint of the frustration I'd been bottling up coming through. He didn't say anything, just nodded and walked away. As Christmas Eve approached, I was still reeling from the flu. There was no way I could cook an entire feast. I decided to take a stand. I won't be able to cook for Christmas, but I'll order dishes from the restaurant, I told Alex, my voice firm. He looked at me, puzzled. What? But Mom's expecting you to cook, like always. I shook my head. I can't, Alex. I'm still weak. She'll have to deal with it. He sighed, a look of resignation on his face. Okay, I'll tell her. Later, when Alex relayed the message to Margaret over the phone, I could hear her shrill voice from across the room. Order food? That's her solution? Fine, but she better not expect me to cook. Christmas Eve arrived, and the delivery man from my restaurant showed up with the food. Margaret was there to meet him, signing the delivery papers without so much as a glance. Little did she know what she was actually agreeing to. As we gathered for dinner, I could feel Margaret's eyes burning into me. Too lazy to cook, Claire? Taking the easy way out, I see. Her words stung, but I bit back a retort. Alex was silent, his eyes fixed on his plate. Throughout dinner, Margaret's comments flew fast and furious. Can't even cook a meal for her family. What kind of wife are you, Claire? I clenched my fists under the table, my patience wearing thin. Alex didn't say a word, his silence a heavy presence at the table. After dinner, as I helped clear the table, Margaret cornered me. You've outdone yourself with laziness this year, Claire. Can't even cook a simple Christmas dinner. I turned to her, my voice low but fierce. I was sick, Margaret. I did what I could. She scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. Sick? Looks more like laziness to me. You've just taken the easy way out. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. I'm not your personal chef, Margaret. I'm not here to bend over backward for you. Her eyes widened in shock, and used to being spoken back to. But I was past caring. Alex finally spoke up, his voice weak. Mom, Claire's right. She was sick. But Margaret brushed him off, her gaze still fixed on me. You've made your point, Claire. Don't expect any sympathy from me. As all the guests gathered in the living room, I stood up, the eyes of the guests curiously fixed on me. A sly smile played on my lips, a sense of retribution fueling my courage. "Before everyone leaves, I have something to say," I announced, my voice steady, yet loud enough to cut through the post-dinner chatter. Margaret, sitting at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow. "What now, Claire? Another one of your excuses?" "No, Mrs. Thompson. It's about the dinner tonight," I replied, my satisfaction growing. "You owe $5,000 for it." A collective gasp filled the room. Margaret's face transitioned from smugness to shock. "Excuse me? $5,000? For what?" I held up the invoice, detailing every item. "For everything, the groceries, chef's labor, delivery. All of it." Her voice escalated, piercing the shocked silence. "This is absurd. I will not pay for your incompetence." "But you already agreed to, Mrs. Thompson, when you signed for the delivery," I countered, feeling a surge of power. She sputtered in disbelief. "I signed for the delivery, not for this outrageous bill." From my folder, I produced the signed delivery papers. "Unfortunately, you did. It's all legally binding." Alex, my husband, who had been a silent spectator, finally interjected, his voice laced with unease. "Claire, isn't this a bit much?" Margaret turned to him, her eyes alight with vindication. "See, even your husband knows you're being unreasonable." I faced Alex, my resolve unwavering. "It's not unreasonable, Alex. Your mother needs to understand the cost of her demands." Margaret stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I will not be swindled by you." One of the guests, an elderly aunt, spoke up tentatively. "Margaret, dear, if you signed it, it does seem fair to honor it." Margaret shot her a withering look. "Fair? This is daylight robbery." Alex tried to calm the waters. "Mom, let's discuss this rationally. Maybe there's a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Margaret shrieked. "Claire is exploiting us." I interjected, my patience fraying. "Exploiting? I'm asking to be paid for professional services, Mrs. Thompson." The room had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, the tension almost tangible. Margaret's gaze was venomous. "This is a declaration of war, Claire. You will pay for this." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "I'm standing up for myself, Mrs. Thompson. That's all." As she stormed out of the room, the guests exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. Alex approached me, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Claire, why did you have to do this? In front of everyone?" I looked at him, a sense of finality settling in my heart. "Because, Alex, it was time. Time to show that I won't be pushed around anymore. Not even by your mother." The guests began to disperse, the mood somber, the festive spirit lost. I knew this was a turning point, a moment that would define the future of my relationship with Margaret and maybe even with Alex. The morning after the Christmas debacle was a battleground in our kitchen. The air was thick with resentment and unsaid words. Alex had obviously talked to his mother before, broke the silence with a voice sharpened by anger. "You humiliated my mother, Claire. In front of everyone. How could you?" I slammed my coffee cup down, my patience frayed to its limits. "Humiliated her? Alex, she's been walking all over me for years. When will you see that?" He glared at me, his words cutting through the air. "She's my mother, Claire. She was just being herself. You didn't have to go and make a scene." I stood up, my own anger rising. "Being herself? You mean being overbearing, insulting, and downright disrespectful? And you never did a thing to stop her." He scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy? She's always right, Claire. You just don't understand her." I stared at him in disbelief. Always right? Even when she treats me like dirt? Is that what you really think, Alex? He didn't back down. Yes, I do. She's my mother. She comes first. That was the last straw. I felt something inside me snap. First? What about your wife, Alex? Where do I come in your life? He didn't answer, just gave me a cold, hard look. I took a deep breath, my decision clear in my mind. You know what, Alex? I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm filing for divorce. His face went from anger to shock. Divorce? You're going to throw away our marriage over this. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. No, Alex. I'm saving myself. From your mother, and from a husband who won't stand up for his wife. He looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, he just stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, a mix of anger, relief, and sadness swirling inside me. The rest of the day passed in a tense silence. The chasm between us had grown too wide to bridge. I knew I had made the right decision, but it didn't make it any less painful. Months had passed since I filed for divorce. The world I once knew had crumbled, but from its ashes, I was building something new, something that was mine. I found myself in the kitchen of my apartment, the morning sun casting a warm glow on the walls. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, a comforting presence in my newfound solitude. My phone rang, breaking the peaceful silence. It was my best friend, Lisa. Hey, Claire. How are you holding up? Her voice was filled with concern. I took a sip of my coffee, a smile touching my lips. I'm good, Lisa. Really, I am. I feel free. She chuckled. That's great to hear. You sound better. I leaned against the counter. I am better. I'm focusing on myself now, my career. I'm rediscovering who I am, without Alex, without Margaret. There was a pause, and then she said, I'm proud of you, Claire. You're doing what's best for you. I sighed, a sense of contentment washing over me. Yeah, it's been tough, but I feel stronger, you know? I'm finally standing up for myself. Lisa's voice brightened. Speaking of standing up for yourself, how's the restaurant doing? I glanced out the window, a sense of determination building within me. It's going great. I've been creating new dishes, experimenting. I feel alive in the kitchen again. That's the Claire I know, Lisa said, her voice warm with affection. Hey, why don't you come over tonight? Cook us one of your amazing dishes, and we can catch up. I laughed, the sound light and genuine. I'd love that, Lisa. It'll be nice to cook for friends again. After hanging up, I looked around my kitchen, a space that was once a battlefield of marital disputes and now a sanctuary of my independence. I picked up a photo from the counter, one of me and Alex in happier times. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the good times, the love that once was. Then, with a deep breath, I put the photo away in a drawer. It was part of my past, a chapter that had closed. As I prepared for the day, I felt a sense of excitement for what lay ahead. The divorce had been a difficult journey, but it was also a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. That evening, as I cooked in Lisa's kitchen, laughter and chatter filling the room, I realized this was what happiness felt like. No pretense, no pressure, just me being me. As we sat down to eat, Lisa raised her glass. To new beginnings, Claire. I raised mine, a smile spreading across my face. To new beginnings.